Hello, salut tout le monde. Hello, everybody. My name is Jimmy Smith, and welcome to a advanced version of looking at a key grape variety, Sauvignon Blanc. So this is the advanced version, looking at in-depth look at the grape variety Sauvignon Blanc. So let's have a look at Sauvignon Blanc, one of the world's most important grape varieties, which certainly people quite adore these days from around the world. We're going to look a little bit at history. We're going to go into what it's like in the vineyard, what it's like in the winery, and then finally its styles and also where we find it. So first up then, a little bit about the history. Now, there has been a lot written about Sauvignon Blanc, more likely coming from down in the southwest of France, around Bordeaux. But in fact, we have the earliest records of Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley, and that dates back to around the 16th century. So a fair bit of history behind it there. And also about its links and what grape varieties it's linked to will give us a bit of an idea where it's from. The first mention down around Bordeaux, in fact, was not until the 18th century. So we do have around nearly about 150 years difference there of when it was first mentioned. In fact, it was mentioned also quite significantly around the central vineyards in the Loire under the variety Sauvignon Fumé or Blanc Fumé as well, which has been known as in the past. So it's from likely mostly from the Loire. It is related to a Jura grape variety called Savagnin. And Savagnin is a variety from the kind of eastern part of France, from around the Franche Comté. It is also related to Chenin Blanc, so it has an offspring relationship to Sauvignon. It has a sibling relationship to Chenin Blanc and a sibling relationship to a grape called Trousseau from Jura. So if you look at those, that's what gives us the idea that we think it's pretty much going to be from somewhere around the Loire. The Loire River, by the way, starts its life off around the Ardèche in the Massif Central, and then moves for around just over 1,000 kilometers all the way up to the Atlantic, pretty much distances itself from around Bordeaux in the southwest. So therefore, it's likely to have come from somewhere around that central part of France and moved its way along the Loire. Now, it of course did move down to the southwest of France, where it was planted quite a bit around Bordeaux and the southwest, so down towards the Pyrenees, and it wild crossed with a local variety there, a Basque variety, which is Cabernet Franc, and then of course that wild crossing produced an offspring, and that offspring was Cabernet Sauvignon. And these are all parts of the same family tree, therefore. So parent, Sauvignon Blanc, parent, Cabernet Franc, offspring, Cabernet Sauvignon. And very fascinating, if you look at an inherent characteristic throughout all three of these, two parents and the offspring, they all display some level of green note to them. Cabernet Franc, quite stalky and herbaceous. Sauvignon Blanc, quite grassy, quite dill-like, quite herbaceous and nettly, and then Cabernet Sauvignon quite green peppery in its characteristics. So they all have these same sort of genetic coding behind them. And the name, the etymology of the grape Sauvignon, comes from the French sauvage, which means wild. And that's because this is a name given to it from around the Loire again, another reason why it's from around the Loire Valley. In the vineyard, Sauvignon is a kind of an early to mid-ripening variety, meaning that it can sometimes suffer spring frosts if they are early, but it is an early to mid-ripener. Sauvignon Blanc is remarkably vigorous. It really will grow. It's very important to match Sauvignon Blanc with very low vigor rootstocks when grafting them, and also siting them on quite poor nutrient soils. So, for example, things like limestone, which is really just ramped up with calcium carbonate, but low on other nutrients. And this means that it will actually sort of curb the growth of Sauvignon Blanc. Otherwise, it grows exponentially, and intensive canopy management will have to be adopted just to sort of taper back the mass growth of the vine. It produces quite small bunches of small compact small berries, which means that it actually does suffer from quite a lot of bunch rot and botrytis bunch rot, which means you can find that sweet wine production is important from Sauvignon, certainly down in the southwest of France, along with Sauvignon Blanc. And the key thing to note as well, which is something quite championed by the other side of the world around New Zealand, is that picking the variety early means that you will protect what's called the methooxypyrazines, or sometimes just widely called the pyrazines. And these are the very intensive green compounds which you get within Sauvignon Blanc. Picking early, therefore, protects these and means that the wine overall will have an overriding amount of herbaceous green pepper, green note to it. And this is quite common in places like New Zealand, amongst others. Sort of normal picking or even slightly later picking will maintain more fruit and floral compounds and less of these methooxypyrazines. Okay, so that's quite a technical term, but certainly a great way of describing that real green character, something that's quite common in other varieties like Grüne Veltliner from Austria, for instance. In the winery, Sauvignon Blanc will be mainly treated reductively, meaning without oxygen, anaerobically, so in stainless steel, for instance, because it is a variety which is very aromatic, and it is better to protect those aromatics so you have a lovely, very flavoursome, pronounced wine at the end of the production. So reductive winemaking is very commonplace. But in order to flesh it out and give it a bit more body and a bit more roundness, you will find that it is blended with Semillon, certainly down in the southwest of France and in places like Australia. So places like Western Australia, this is fairly common. This will give, certainly in Bordeaux, a slightly richer and robust style because Semillon is much more rounder, textured, lower in its acidities and aromatics, and more kind of honeyed and nutty and more tertiary in characteristics. So it is blended with Semillon. And also in winemaking, something which is being quite understood recently in the last sort of 5 to 10 years is in fact the very high volatile thiols that can be produced from the reaction between the yeast and the sulfur compounds in Sauvignon Blanc, and is something which is quite promoted, which can produce those remarkably aromatic characteristics. Our kind of quite intensive passion fruit, grapefruit note is produced from this process, but also compounds which can be linked towards gunflint, flint and stones is produced that way. All things we do actually often talk about when looking at Sauvignon Blanc. The key places of Sauvignon Blanc are listed as follows. New Zealand is very quickly on the heels of France, but France is just about in the lead. France, with the Loire Valley, of course, being a very important place. Bordeaux, but also the south of France has some in play down around the Languedoc. New Zealand is pretty much mainly Marlborough. There are, of course, Sauvignon Blanc vines in Nelson, in Canterbury, in Martinborough and Hawke's Bay, but Marlborough really dominates the production because of its success over the last sort of 30 to 40 years or so, when Montana and Cloudy Bay started to plant vines in the late 70s, early 80s. South Africa, around Cape Town, Constantia, Stellenbosch, also around the Darling area, you'll find Sauvignon Blanc is quite important, made in a slightly more restrained way than New Zealand, for instance, but still aiming for that quite aromatic style. Moldova has a significant amount at around 8,000. Chile around Casablanca is quite important. Certainly some of their famous styles come from around there. So at the end of the Aconcagua Valley. Australia, around sort of South Australia and also around Western Australia, and then California. There isn't much around Napa, but we do find Sauvignon Blanc being grown coastally and in the central vineyards. So quite a big list. It is a very widely planted grape in the world. It is a very well loved style. And what kind of characteristics do we expect? So what does it taste like? So Sauvignon Blanc is a variety, as you can see from here, it has quite extensive fruit compounds. So you'll find ranging from sort of citric, sort of lemon and lime and gooseberry are quite common. But then, depending on the winemaking style, but also the slightly warmth of the climate and the sunlight, certainly in New Zealand, you can find a lot of passion fruit or grapefruit notes to them. And that's those kind of quite volatile thiol compounds. Now, the pyrazine greens, the metaoxypyrazine compounds, is the grassiness here in the top, the asparagus, also things like green pepper and herbaceous notes. And there is some sort of wet, stony characters here, and that's another thing which is related to the sulfur and the acidity within the wine. The wines, therefore, are remarkably aromatic, very pronounced. Wines are very high in acid. They tend to be light to medium bodied and normally quite dry, unless they are made in a botrytis fashion, along with Semillon making sweet wines. That is basically our advanced look at Sauvignon Blanc, just the one grape variety. It's a rather lovely one. I've got one here just in the meantime. I thought I might as well taste. Bags of aromatics, very, very aromatic. So I hope that you have enjoyed your advanced look at Sauvignon Blanc. I do hope that you have learned something. And please, if you have any comments or questions, please contact us on these handles at Wine with Jimmy, at West London Wine, and then South_London_wine. Our websites are up there. We have a huge amount of online tastings and courses, as well as our classes at our schools, including WSET, Wine Scholar Guild, and our in-house courses and tastings. So I have very much enjoyed this time. I hope you have as well. We'll see you next time. Cheers. I should put this up. Cheers.